All right, I'd love to invite you to say the words of the blessing for study with me. If you'd like, you can unmute and we'll say the words of the blessing together so that we can hear one another's voices. Let's say together, Baruch
Baruch
atah Adonai
atah Adonai
Eloheinu melech
Eloheinu melech
haolam
haolam
asher
asher
kitshanu
kitzanu
b'mitzvotav
b'mitzvotav
v'tzivanu
v'tzivanu
la'asok
la'asok
b'divrei Torah.
b'divrei Torah.
Wonderful, which means blessed is the eternal whose mitzvot to make our lives holy and who commands us to immerse or to engage in words of Torah. A reminder for those who just came in to please put your name and your location into the chat. That way we get to know each other a little bit. So I wanted to talk today about the topic of healing. I want to actually do a study of the Mi Shebeirach prayer and of a passage from the Talmud that I think will sort of help us complicate and interrogate what it means to be healed or to bring healing in Judaism. This is, of course, something that touches all of our lives. We all go through difficult times. We all need healing of some kind at various moments in our lives. The Mi Shebeirach prayer is one that in some ways has made a comeback in liberal Judaism in recent years, partly, honestly, thanks to Debbie Friedman and her melody for the Mi Shebeirach, which many of you probably know how to sing. And if we get that far, we're going to end with Debbie Friedman's Mi Shebeirach and also think about the differences between the traditional Mi Shebeirach and the Debbie Friedman Mi Shebeirach. But the Talmud passage, where I want to spend the bulk of our time today, I think will highlight some of those differences and help us have a conversation about what does it mean to heal? What does healing mean in Judaism? So I do intend this as a discussion. I hope you'll join me to study these texts together. So this is what you see before you are the words of the traditional Mi Shebeirach prayer. It's traditionally said during the Torah service. At a moment in the service when the congregation is mostly all present, people are invited to share names of loved ones who need healing, and the prayer leader would say this prayer on behalf of all those individuals. So I'm going to read it in English, and I'll be curious what you see here. What is here, what isn't here, what does this prayer say about healing in Judaism? So it says, Mi Shebeirach Avotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, sorry, this one doesn't say Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. I'm so used to saying that, but of course this is the traditional blessing, which only includes the men. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses and Aaron, David, and Solomon. In a liberal prayer book, you would there add Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Bless the following, and that, of course, is when we say names. May the holy blessed one be filled with mercy for their health to be restored and their strength to be revived. May God quickly send them complete healing from heaven to their limbs and organs among the other sick of Israel, a healing of the spirit and a healing of the body. And let us say Amen. So that's the traditional Mi Shebeirach prayer. I'm going to make it a little bigger so you can see it in your screen. And let's just talk about it for a minute. Like I said, what is here? What isn't here? What does it say about healing in Judaism? And what questions does it raise when you look at this blessing? I see Bob. Go ahead.
Well, I have to say, as long as we're going to take this approach in terms of naming ancestors, that we ought to include Zipporah and go on from there, and particularly all of David and Solomon's wives.
Yep, so there are people missing from here, right? And we named the mothers, the imahot, that are missing, and certainly there are other people in the tradition. It's also interesting that the tradition does throw in all these names. We could just say, God bring us healing, but instead our healing prayer invokes the names of other individuals as part of our tradition. In this case, a relatively expansive, though certainly not fully inclusive, but an expansive list of people. Patriarchs, lawgiver, priest, David and kings, David and Solomon, right? What do these people have to do with our healing experience? And certainly we could add in, as you say, Bob, matriarchs, Miriam, the healer, lots of people from our tradition who could be added in. So I see Janet. Go ahead, Janet.
Okay, my rabbi also adds to the prayer, and this, we are not a Reformed synagogue, we are a unaffiliated conservative, but adds language in about giving the doctors the strength to help people heal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that raises a really good theological question of where does healing come from? Are we praying to God to cure our diseases? Or what are we praying for here, right? Or are we praying to God for some kind of earthly strength for ourselves, for our medical professionals, for each other, right? What are we praying for? So I see Sarah, Susan, and Cheryl, and then I'm going to cut it off because I want to turn us to the Talmud. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, so it does mention spirit, but it does it kind of in the context of spirit because of body, because most of this is focused on body healing. And what we say at Central certainly is we talk about addictions, we talk about emotional ills that people suffer. And I'm not getting any of that. I'm just seeing physical, external manifestations of healing rather than internal healing.
Great. Yeah, so mostly this talks about limbs and organs, but then it does, you're right, throw in this little bit about healing of spirit, right? So there is a recognition that healing is not only physical in Judaism here. There's refuat haguf, the healing of the body, but there's also the healing of the spirit. And what does that mean to be healed in spirit and or body? Susan, and then Cheryl.
I just have a quick question. What is the date of this traditional prayer?
Oh, to tell you the truth, I have no idea. I assume it's medieval, but I don't know the answer to that right now.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Cheryl.
Because that makes a difference in some senses.
It does, yeah. It would give us a context for what's being said and why. I don't know the answer. Sorry.
Okay.
Cheryl, please.
So I was also going to comment on the fact that they did include the spirit, although it's as if they knew that there was something there besides the physical, but they weren't sure what to say about it. So they just kind of left it hanging there.
Yep. Named it without going into any more detail about it, right? There is something called healing of spirit here, but it doesn't say anything about what it is. That's a great segue into our Talmud passage, actually. So this is from Tractate Brachot. Brachot is the tractate that deals with blessings and prayers. Some of us through La Asok are studying Brachot together on Monday afternoons.
10th or 11th century.
Okay, good to know. Thanks, Susan. So this is a story about some rabbis who live in the 3rd century. Our main character here is Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Yochanan, what you need to know about Rabbi Yochanan as we read this story is Rabbi Yochanan is an early, what's called Amora. Amoraim are the rabbis who live after the codification of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the very important law code that the first 200 years of the rabbinic period were dedicated to putting together. After that, it becomes normative and the rabbis begin to sort of interpret and build Jewish life around the Jewish world using the rabbinic tradition. Rabbi Yochanan is one of the first to do that. He's one of the first instrumental rabbis in transitioning Judaism from its early, very formative rabbinic period into the question of what does it mean to live, a rabbinic Talmudic Jewish life all around the world. Rabbi Yochanan also is known as a healer, maybe even a little bit of a magic maker. We'll see a little bit of that in this passage. The third thing you need to know about Rabbi Yochanan is that he is someone who had undergone great suffering in his life. The Talmud says, now how true this is, of course, we can never know. The Talmud says that he had 10 sons and he lost 10 sons. In other words, he had known great suffering. He had buried his own children. And Rabbi Yochanan is known, one of the things he's known for is when somebody, and we'll see this in this passage, when somebody was going through a hard time, he would It's a little morbid, but this is what he did. He would pull out a bone from his 10th son and say, this is a bone of my 10th son, by way of saying, I've been through it too. I've been through very hard things. So this is a sort of a famous but morbid story about Rabbi Yochanan and his ability to empathize and heal and bring healing. In fact, maybe both physical and spiritual healing to people around him. So that's the background of the story that we're about to read. And the story goes that Rabbi Chia bar Abba, a student of Rabbi Yochanan, fell ill. His teacher, Rabbi Yochanan, entered to visit him and said to him, is your suffering dear to you? Is your suffering dear to you is essentially a way of saying, do you want to be sick like this? Like, are you choosing this? Do you like this? And Rabbi Chia says to him, I welcome neither the suffering nor its reward. In other words, no, I don't want this suffering. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, give me your hand. Rabbi Chia bar Abba gave him his hand, and Rabbi Yochanan stood him up. Stood him up means brought him healing. He healed him. Here we see maybe a little bit of the magical healing ability of Rabbi Yochanan. Of course, the Talmud doesn't say how he healed him, right? Was this, did he put his hands on his head and say, you are healed? Or is this more like, something spiritual? Is it, did he have a potion? Did he have a kind of an herb that he brought? We don't know, right? The point is Rabbi Yochanan here performs an act of healing on behalf of his student and colleague, Rabbi Chia bar Abba. I think we have to imagine these are common things that happened back then, right? In a world where doctors were not always available, people had all kinds of knowledge that they would bring to each other. This could be as simple as bringing him some kind of special tea that, that was healing, that soothed his throat, that healed him in some way. And so that's what Rabbi Yochanan does for his colleague. Next story, or next paragraph of the story. Now Rabbi Yochanan himself fell ill, and another colleague, Rabbi Hanina, entered to visit him and said, same thing, is your suffering dear to you? Rabbi Yochanan said, I welcome neither this suffering nor its reward. Rabbi Hanina said, give me your hand. He gave him his hand, and Rabbi Hanina stood him up. Okay, before I go on to the next part of the story, we've now seen the same thing twice. Rabbi Yochanan, the healer, brings healing to Rabbi Chia. Then Rabbi Yochanan himself gets sick, and Rabbi Hanina, another colleague, comes on in, does the same thing, gives him his hand, extends his hand, and stands him up and brings him healing, heals him from his ailment. Before I go on any further, what do you see here? What do you notice? And what questions might it bring up to look at these two stories, these two paragraphs? I see Sarah. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, to me, immediately I think it's an emotional thing rather than a physical thing, and that they really needed the connection with another human being to heal that spirit.
What makes you say that it's an emotional thing going on here?
It doesn't talk about what the illness is, and the fact that they can so rapidly rise up out of this illness and stand and walk, and it sounds like be healed, tells me that he's not dying of appendicitis. This is not some awful disease, sepsis or something else that really had them deathly ill, because there's no way that holding out your hand and saying, oh, sure, I'd neither welcome it or reject it, and suddenly they're all better. That's why.
Yeah, I can see it. Of course, it doesn't tell us how long the standing up takes, right? The word stood him up could be a stand-in for something much longer, right? Some kind of a process of talking with him, healing with him. We don't know exactly what goes on there, but I agree with you. It doesn't sound like the flu, because it doesn't say that he brought him medicine, right? It says that he he somehow did something by being with him, gave him his hand. And that'll come up in our next paragraph. Susan, what do you see here?
Well, I was going to say something similar, that it seems to me that it's possible that these rabbis were having some kind of mental suffering, and they were lonely, and their family wasn't around. And when their colleagues came and said, "Give me your hand," it meant, "I am here." And once he stood up, the act of standing, whatever that might mean, with a companion, a respected companion, helped him to feel better and to put things in perspective. And in that regard, I will just say that I've been sick since last Saturday, and I finally managed to take a shower today, and nobody helped me, but the shower sure did. So I got stood up too.
There you go, by the shower.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that all-important word that Cheryl just put into the chat, hineni. Hineni means here I am. It's the way that we show up for each other, right? So is healing solely the domain of the physical, as the prayer made it sound? Or is healing also something spiritual, something emotional, something communal that goes on, something relational that goes on between us? This sounds to me as well like somebody who's, in fact, I'll save that comment for the next paragraph. You'll see that the rabbis now ask a question, which is, Rabbi Yochanan, he was a healer. He was able to stand himself up. Sorry, he was able to stand up the other guy. So when Rabbi Yochanan got sick, why didn't he just stand himself up? Why couldn't he just heal himself? If he knows how to heal people, just heal yourself, Rabbi. The Gemara asks, why did Rabbi Yochanan wait for Rabbi Hanina to restore him to health? Let Rabbi Yochanan stand himself up. And the Gemara answers, a prisoner cannot generally free himself from prison. Well, it's really interesting language here, right? And Sarah, you pointed to this earlier. This sounds less like someone who has the flu and more like someone who is suffering some kind of emotional thing, right? In the language of prison, I mean, we can litigate, no pun intended, whether we like the language of prison here, right? And yet, isn't there a sense for those of us who have experienced a depression or a very difficult moment in our lives, doesn't it feel like being sort of like locked up in a space that you can't make your way out of, right? And so are the rabbis here recognizing that we need each other to get out of those spaces, right? Rabbi Yochanan cannot pull himself out of a place of deep, dark sadness or deep, dark suffering or loss or whatever it is that he is going through. The rabbis here are recognizing that healing is something that happens communal. This weekly class is, of course, dedicated to finding hope in our text. And it seems to me that one of the messages that we find here that is a hopeful message is we have the ability to heal each other. We have the ability to help each other out of our darkest moments. But the story's not over yet because somebody else is going to get sick or is going to need some healing. Rabbi Elazar fell sick. Rabbi Yochanan, good old Rabbi Yochanan, entered to visit him. He saw that he was lying in a dark room. Rabbi Yochanan, who I told you had magical powers, exposed his arm, and light radiated from his flesh, filling the house. Most of us can't do that, but like I said, he was a special guy. He saw from the light, he saw that Rabbi Elazar was crying. Now, there's one more piece of information you need to know about Rabbi Yochanan before we read this story, which is that Rabbi Yochanan is known as being exceedingly beautiful. There are actually multiple stories in the Talmud about how good looking, how beautiful, how radiant Rabbi Yochanan is. So he walks in, he finds that his colleague, who again, was he ill? Was he depressed? What's going on? He's in this room and he finds him crying. He walks in and he says, why are you crying? And he goes through a couple of possible options, possible possibilities of why he's crying. If it's because you didn't study as much Torah as you would have liked, well, we have learned, let me highlight this, we have learned that one who brings a substantial sacrifice and one who brings a meager sacrifice have equal merit, as long as he directs his heart toward heaven. In other words, it's the effort that matters. You have in your lifetime learned lots of Torah. Don't be depressed that you haven't learned more, that you haven't done more, accomplished more, because the effort is what's precious in God's eyes. But no, that's not the reason he's depressed. If it's because you lack sustenance, i.e., you're poor, well, not every person merits to eat off of two tables, a table of wealth and a table of Torah. And Rabbi Yochanan is saying to him here, you are wise and learned and a great scholar. That's just as good as being rich. Don't be crying. Don't be sad about your poverty. Look at the richness of wealth that you have. But no, that's not it either. So Rabbi Yochanan says, if you're crying over children who've died, this is the bone of my 10th son. I warned you about that part, right? Here's Rabbi Yochanan saying, I empathize as well. I've been through hard things. Look at what I've been through. But none of these things actually satisfies or addresses what is making Rabbi Elazar cry. Here's what Rabbi Elazar says. Rabbi Elazar said to Rabbi Yochanan, I'm not crying over my misfortune, but rather over this beauty of yours that will decompose in the earth. In other words, I look at you, you are so beautiful, Rabbi Yochanan, that you're going to die and you're going to go into the earth and decompose. What's he saying here? Before I go any further, what's the mess? Like, why is he crying over Rabbi Yochanan's intense beauty that will someday decompose in the earth? What's the message here? Is it like, oh, you're so beautiful? Susan, what do you see here?
I don't know, but I think it's ridiculous.
All right, fair enough.
Because everybody dies.
Well, but that might be the point, actually, right?
Everybody dies. And crying over a death that is going to occur at an unknown time in the future is kind of futile. Although I have to say that when my mother had Alzheimer's, I grieved for 7 years before she died.
Before she died, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and then when Rabbi Yochanan said it's certainly appropriate to weep about that, that is rather the height of hubris. Because he's like saying, yes, I am beautiful, and yes, I'll die, and how terrible is that?
Okay. All right, Vicky, what do you see?
Well, is he also sort of grieving in advance over the loss of a personal friend? You know, that's another thing. Again, I'm not particularly fond of this at all. I think it's kind of, it doesn't speak to me so much. It sounds kind of ridiculous. I understand grieving in advance if someone is ill or something, but this said that when Rabbi Yochanan got there, the guy was in a bad place. So had he been sick before? Had he been, I mean, how long had he been, you know, grieving over this or whatever? So it's kind of leaves
Right.
you with a question.
Right. Yeah. He was in this rough place already. Rabbi Yochanan walks in. So this gives us a hint that actually this may not be about Rabbi Yochanan exactly, right? There was
Well,
something
it
going
sounds
on.
like it may be something else, and this is, I mean, it's like a therapy. You don't get to the heart of the matter right away.
Right.
So it takes a while.
Mm-hmm. Bob, go ahead.
I think there's a trick here, and I don't think that maybe we're falling in to the belief that Rabbi Elazar was already crying before Rabbi Yochanan turned on his magic light. And maybe the illness was just a routine illness, just like those of all the other sages that we've already read about here. But when Elazar saw Yochanan's beauty, that's maybe when he started to cry over the future loss of this beauty. But that wasn't actually the cause of his illness at the beginning. As evidenced by the next paragraph, he was cured in the same old way as everybody else.
All right, so let me give you my take. I know there's more hands up, but as we reach the end of our time here, let me give you my take on this. I think that that Rabbi Elazar crying over Rabbi Yochanan's beauty is a way of saying, I'm crying because all of us are going to die. Even you, you who are known for your beauty and your wisdom and your goodness, if you're going to die, then all the more so all the rest of us. So it seems to me that Rabbi Elazar here is weeping over what he feels in this moment is the futility of life. What's the point of living if everything is just going to die? So I think that when Rabbi Yochanan walks in, and yes, he's not crying yet, but I think to go back to what others were saying, I think this is a description of someone who's in a moment of depression, who's in a moment of deep darkness. And when Rabbi Yochanan walks in, the crying becomes about Rabbi Yochanan, but he was already in this moment of suffering. Something was going on before, and he looks at him and he says, this is all futile. We're all going to die someday. What is the point of even being here on this world if we know that this world is full of suffering? This world is full of death. This world is a place where there is suffering and sickness. And Rabbi Yochanan says, yeah, that's something to weep over. Over this, it is appropriate to weep, because what else can we do about it, right? And look, and this to me is the most powerful part of the whole thing. What happens? What does Rabbi Yochanan do? Does he offer a solution? Does he try to change how his colleague feels? Does he tell him to buck up and feel better? No, they just cry together. They just weep, right? And so to me, the message here is that the most important thing we can do with our loved ones in moments where they are feeling down, where they are feeling sad, where they are feeling all these elements of unwellness, is to be with them, to cry together with them, to validate them. It doesn't mean getting down in the pit with them. It means letting them know that we are there with them. And meanwhile, that's when this can happen. Rabbi Yochanan can then say, give me your hand if you want to, and stand him up from his healing. So it seems to me that the hope here is found in the ability of human beings to be together, to be a source of healing for one another, which brings me, in the last minute we have here, to the Debbie Friedman version of the Mi Shebeirach, where she writes these really beautiful words. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing. What does it mean to be a blessing? Before you can pray for healing from God for people, we actually pray for this. We actually need to pray for the strength to be a blessing of healing for other people. So it seems to me that all of this is embedded in that ancient blessing, that somehow the rabbis understood that healing was not only about, getting better from the flu, but also about the ways we experience emotion, the ways we are there for each other, the ways that we can be a blessing in each other's lives. And that ultimately, what it means to bring refuah into the world is, to use our language, is to be a source of hope for each other, right? Sometimes that means to bring people a different perspective, but truly sometimes it means just to be there and just to cry together and just to hold somebody's hand. And that, I think, helps us to stand each other up like Rabbi Yochanan does. So thank you, everybody, for this discussion. I appreciate your looking through this text with me. Next week, we are going to study with Rabbi Michael Statz, and we're going to be looking at the book of Esther. Where is there hope to be found in Esther in the days before Purim? So I wish you all an early Shabbat Shalom. Please come back next week, and I look forward to seeing you then. Thanks, everyone.